thank you for coming to our fireside chat with Tony Agatha. Today, we'll talk about COP28, which took place pretty much exactly a month ago back in Dubai. It was arguably one of the biggest news items of the past year, and not without reason. It broke all previous records by attracting over 90,000 registered delegates from under 200 countries, and there was also no shortage of drama, suspense, and breakthroughs at this event. And for this particular reason, I'll quickly summarize my main three takeaways from this event, and then we can proceed to the main part of the conversation. And as a typical European, I'll start with the bad news from the takeaways about COP28 and the sort of conclusions that were drawn during it. So first up, I think it's fair to say that the world is burning. The data from the global stocktake clearly indicates that the world is currently not on track to reduce emissions to limit temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And as a matter of fact, in a report that was published just before COP28, the United Nations clearly stated that the world, or based at least on the existing climate policies, is on track to reach temperatures nearly 3 degrees by the end of this century. And that's a pretty bad situation, and I don't think that there's a way of how we can potentially sugarcoat this. Second, despite the widespread initial skepticism, I think COP28 turned out to be pretty good, relatively speaking, because I remember that during the first couple of days of the conference, the media and the pundits were sort of saying that, oh, you have COP, but that's basically like a huge trade fair and a quote-unquote glorified networking event for people who work in the climate and energy industry. And I think that was the New York Times who said that. Yet, over the course of 2 weeks, we saw a tremendous number of initiatives, which I think are noteworthy and are really good. So, for example, there's clear evidence that the initiative to tackle methane emissions is going increasingly, gaining momentum, is getting stronger. That's really important. Furthermore, we're taking big steps towards renewable energy and energy efficiency. That's fantastic. And obviously, there's good evidence that we're taking, or at least starting to take, climate finance seriously, which is fantastic. And all of these initiatives, mostly which took place on the margins, culminated in the agreement reached at the 11th hour to quote-unquote transition away from fossil fuels. While this language is not what the EU and many of its international partners were initially hoping for, because we wanted to have, quote-unquote, to phase out fossil fuels, I think that is still possibly, the best indication so far that maybe, just maybe, we might be witnessing the demise of the fossil fuels era, maybe. And although not legally binding, COP28 will undoubtedly send a powerful message to international markets, policymakers and national governments about the direction in which the world might be heading. Third and finally, the EU definitely played an absolutely massive role during COP28. It not only pushed for the most progressive language to be included in the final communiqué, but it also led a series of very important initiatives. For example, it spearheaded the initiative to triple renewable energy capacity and double energy efficiency measures. It also pledged to allocate, I think, over 20 billion euros for the Africa-EU Green Energy Initiative, which is a lot, and invest 2.3 billion euros to support the energy transition worldwide, while also allocating 175 million euros in financial support to reduce methane emissions. But enough from me. I would like to now give the floor to someone who has actually been to Dubai and has been participating in the COP28 negotiations. And I would like to introduce Tony Agatha, who kindly agreed to share his experiences from COP28 with us. He is the European Union Special Envoy for Climate and Environment Diplomacy, and previously he worked in the cabinet of the former Commissioner Franz Timmermans. And before that, he held a long and distinguished career in the Dutch diplomatic service. And I'm equally happy to say that the event will be moderated by none other than Stephen Evers, my boss and the director of the European Union Institute for Security Studies. And on that cheerful note, guys, the floor is yours.
Okay, everyone, welcome to this, what we build as a fireside chat, but Tony and I were talking earlier, it feels a bit more like the Politburo announcing the statistics for tractor production for 2024. But in all seriousness, it's very good that we have Tony Agotha with us to indeed talk about what happened in Dubai, what it all means, and how to make sense of it, and what it means also for how the EU operates as a global actor in multilateral settings and what have you. To be clear, it's on the record. We also have colleagues online who can follow us. So you are physically with us here in Brussels, but there are some colleagues with us online. Tony, thanks very much for making time. You heard from Lucas how he tried to give the sort of three main takeaways from COP28. So why don't we start? Why don't you rate it? How, on a scale of 1 to 10? Yeah. How well did we collectively do overall in Dubai? And well, we, I mean the EU, but also the global climate negotiating club.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. And I think out of act of solidarity, because I ran out of the office, I put on my warm coat, but forgot my jacket, which is like a diplomatic boo-boo. So it would be really great if you could take off yours. I think that's... Second of all, playing a little bit on your Politburo thing, I mean, when they ask about how is it with the climate situation, and Lucas already gave it reminds me a little bit of President Carter, who had a summit with Brezhnev. And he asked, he said, Leonid, tell me in one word, how is your economy doing? And Brezhnev thought hard and he said, good. And President Carter said, well, come on, give me 2 words. And Brezhnev thought again and he said, no good. and basically, when you talk about where climate is, this is basically where we are. When it comes to COP28, I checked in this morning after I saw this question. I checked in with Jake Worksman, who's our head of delegation, who works at DG Klima. He's been doing this for years. He's our lead negotiator. And as I said, force of nature, he said, no, force of reason. And I asked him this question, and he said, I refuse to answer such a simplistic question. But for me, Glasgow, 26, was a 7. Sharm el-Sheikh was a 6.
And Paris was before to get a level?
Paris was high. Was pretty high. Yeah. I think I would. I think 10 is difficult, but it was extremely important to set the machinery in action, and it's working. So I would say Dubai is an 8.
Okay.
So I'm actually pretty much. And when you spoke about the words phase out and. Remember in Glasgow, at the very end, suddenly Alok Sharma put in the words phase out of coal. And Chinese got very upset. This was not part of the negotiations. Where did this come from? And there was a whole kerfuffle which ended out with the words phase down of coal. And the first cycle, which you read in the media, was failure. But if you look back, there was no reason whatsoever to mention coal. So for me, in the run-up to a COP28, and with colleagues we were discussing, the problem is with the words phase out, it becomes almost totemic and symbolic. And what you have to do is draw a line under all the decisions you take, all the outcomes, and then say, are we actually going to reduce our emissions? Are we going to move the needle? And so I think whatever you call it, close the book, phase out, phase down, transition away, I think the world did itself a big favor in COP28.
Good. That's important. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of methane and climate finance and other things that Lucas and others have identified as not only crucial, but also areas where the needle is moving? How do you rate those other issues?
Well, I would like to focus because, I mean, there's so many issues that played on the table, but if anyone goes to the global stocktake text, look at paragraph 27, which speaks about... No, but I'll tell you. Which speaks about the importance of science, I think science has to be our North Star and has to continue to be our North Star. And anyone who says you're a climate zealot, you just say, well, let's look at the science. And anyone who ignores the science, I would call a zealot, basically. So that's paragraph 27. Also, the necessity to stick to 1.5. And what Lucas did not say, it was not only the hottest year on record in 2023, but according to all the analysis, the average, it's an average, by the way, was 1.48 degrees already.
Last year, we're there.
So we're there, and we're feeling the effects on it. But so then paragraph 28, and that was the big paragraph. And in these negotiations, when we went into the Dubai and the first text appeared, that didn't look good at all. It was more like a menu a la carte with the words could, with words on limiting emissions, nothing about phase out, closing the book, transitioning, nothing about that. Okay. And that wasn't good.
Very good. No, this is perfect, because you also started to give us a little bit of a sense on how these talks may actually occur. I think many of us, we read about the COP in the press, and we try to follow it as best as we can, but if you're not there physically, it's hard to get a sense of how does it really work, global climate negotiations. And you said, when texts started to emerge, they came out in the wrong way, and then what happens? Tell us a little bit. You don't have to go into the particular details of the minutiae, but I think it will be helpful for many people to try to understand. These texts emerge, then how do we as EU operate? I mean, we are many, we are member states, we are Commission, you yourself, EAS. These texts emerge, then what happens?
Well, first of all, it's good to know there were 100,000 registered people going to the COP. Not all of them were negotiators, thank God. But many states were, and it's a consensus way of making negotiations. So that's very complicated, multi-layered chessboard. The EU comes there with, as you say, 27 member states, a presidency with a very strong and experienced minister, Teresa Ribera, and a new climate commissioner who, by the way, did 50 days around the world after his hearing and stepped up to the plate big time. And a lean, mean negotiating machine, as I said, by DG Klima, about 30 people. They were strengthened with DG Environment, DG INTPA, DG Agri. So it's a well-oiled machine every morning at 6:30, which is basically 3:30 Brussels time. So the first week was a bit tricky. First a briefing amongst the principals, then they went into all the, with the negotiating team, debrief, setting out the marching orders. That was the first week. The second week, the ministers all came, and then the big text came on the table, and then every morning the EU had a ministerial coordination meeting with Teresa Ribera and Wopke Hoekstra, trying to corral all these ministers, some of them very strong, very experienced, great ambitions, to make sure we had unity of message every day. Because as Wopke Hoekstra at one point quipped, he said, as General de Gaulle said, I love to fight coalitions because they have to coordinate, and so we did. But to the credit of all these people, and I saw it in Sharm, I saw it in Glasgow and Madrid, we do that rather well, to be honest.
That's interesting, because the EU sometimes hears that when we operate in multilateral fora, I'm thinking of the UN more generally, other places, you hear sometimes this argument, yeah, but you Europeans, you're so busy with yourselves, right? Trying to come to that there's little bandwidth and capacity left to engage with the rest. And it's of course catastrophic if that really were to be the case. But what I'm hearing from you is no. So tell us a little bit about, once you had all these daily coordination meetings, how does it then happen? How does the EU, US, China triangle work? What about our engagement with wider key stakeholders? Give us a little bit of sense.
Well, first of all, all these ministers have their own networks. So in the morning, you kind of say, you go there, who are you going to see? And there's a lot of feedback back and forth, also during the day through WhatsApp and all these ways of communication. So actually, it strengthens our heft that you have all these principals talking to their colleagues. When it comes to China, EU, and the US, well, that has worked, as far as I could see, for the past 4 years really well. I should also say, now Timmermans is gone, John Kerry just left, or is about to leave the scene, he hasn't left yet, as Xi Jinping, the Chinese climate envoy also, so we call them the three amigos, never to their face, but they knew each other, they trusted each other, and they were instrumental, thank you very much, they were instrumental in forging consensus. And now with Wopke Hoekstra, actually the same thing kind of happened. Now, that doesn't mean we agree on everything. Obviously not. With the US and the EU, I like to compare it to inches and centimeters. We have a different approach to things, but we're pretty like-minded. China is interesting because China, on the one hand, you can criticize it for its coal and for its emissions. On the other hand, you know, last year it put online about 210 gigawatt of solar, 70 gigawatt of wind, 7 gigawatt hydro, 3 gigawatt nuclear. All together, even juxtaposed with their coal, is bringing down emissions. So they're doing a huge effort, and they're committed to their plan, and they're fulfilling it. So, you know, we have some qualms with what they're doing, but they're a pretty strong player. Yes, the progressives, especially the small island states,
for instance,
for them, this is existential. And literally, they summoned a meeting. We all ran to a room. We had to negotiate with the guards because it was not reserved, this room. We got about 70, 80 people out. We finally got in. And then the Marshall Islands stood up and she said, we're not here to sign our death warrant. Because these islands are literally sinking into, and it brings home that when you're, you know, with paper and talking about CO2 and all these acronyms, this is real for a lot of people. And I promise you, it's going to be real for us too. We're not sinking yet, well, maybe the Netherlands, but we're going to have these effects. So action is needed.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to ask you, everywhere you read every day about world of power politics, there's a degree of violence, political violence and wars and conflict that is really unprecedented. To what extent are these climate talks insulated from that wider context or not? I mean, sometimes I heard about people say there was a sort of a climate bubble. People were negotiating really on the climate issue and defending their respective positions. Or was it that, no, you cannot separate these two. Everything is connected in this world, and this wider geopolitical fights that we see everywhere also affect the climate negotiations. How do you see that?
Well, I think that's a very pertinent question, and over the years I've come to the conclusion that arguably one of the last platforms and themes you can speak about is about climate and environment. And that is because it is existential, and that is also because if we're all in one boat, you cannot sit in that boat and say, well, only your part is sinking. So it is something that everyone feels responsible for in their own way, and we come together. And COP, I take a clip with my phone for my children every time I go there, and I walk around literally 15 minutes to film. It's just so many people from all different cultures, different clothes, different interests, and ultimately we come out with a solution. Now, if you look around the world, ripping at its seams, there are a lot of multilateral institutions which are under pressure.
Massively.
And so I think it's good that COP succeeded, not just for climate reasons. I also think it's good because if anything we need nowadays is global diplomacy, and global diplomacy that is effective. We need that. So when it doesn't mean that geopolitical developments have no influence whatsoever, but I think there is a great degree of compartmentalization. And I think the good example is when it comes to the US-China relationship,
for instance.
When they have difficulties, and there are some, and even when talks suddenly are suspended, what is the first thing that they start up again? It's John Kerry and Xi Jinping. When there was an ASEM summit before COP, what was the first thing they came out with? A Sunnylands declaration. And to me, I think that's a great thing. And I think it's important because we could use that also to discuss other things and to show the world, okay, we're still talking.
We're still talking, and multilateral diplomacy is capable of addressing real issues in
one of the most difficult issues.
Yeah, okay, that is I think is an encouraging message. Maybe a little bit sort of connected to it. I want to bring another issue to you, which is, I mean, every day where you go, there's this notion not only that multilateralism is under pressure, as you put it, but there's also a little bit this notion of the plural South, the majority world, the global South, taking the measure of the EU, believing that we are not delivering. There's deep felt sense of grievances, double standards, what have you. Okay, and I think there's a lot of underlying political trends that compel us to take that notion very seriously. But at the same time, one should perhaps also point out that in principle, on the climate issue, the EU has taken very serious commitments and is not only talking about things, but doing things. The EU is and remains a leading global source of public funding for climate finance. We support countries in all sorts of ways on the energy transition. So where do we come down, and what did you hear from people you interacted with in Dubai? Because you also hear this notion of green protectionism, and so talk us a little bit how others see our climate credentials. And is it a good story? Is it a no good story? Which is it?
I would first give the person who's coughing, maybe somebody could give him a glass of water, because I feel sorry for him. Yeah. There you go. Yes, so I mean, everything you said is, I think, true. And of course, I would be here to say that the EU walks the talk. We're the biggest donor. We brokered the loss and damage deal. We try to help as best we can. That's all true. But at the same time, so it is true. And I think there's a group of people that would say, we don't like your policies because they impact us. Well, part of that group, I think, we'll have to explain better what it really is, because there's a lot of disinformation out there. There's a part of group that's upset because it really impacts them. That is a group which we have to really take seriously, and I think our policies have to be catered in the best way possible to enable these countries to transition with us, because everyone is committed to Paris, and their future is also served by this transition, and we need to put money where our mouth is, and we're doing a lot, by the way, but I think that's important. And then there's a group, and these are overlapping groups, that will continue to criticize the EU regardless, because it's a politically opportune thing to do, and I think that's part of diplomacy, part of politics, but we should not be fazed too much about it. The bottom line is, the policies that we do domestically in the EU, it was something bold. For the first time we said, we're not going to wait for the rest of the world. We're going to make a leap forward because we believe the red lines of the planet are approaching fast, and at some points too fast. And the natural concomitant of that, the mirror image, is that obviously we cannot green ourselves and then just export our pollution to other parts of the world. So yes, we have other external policies. A carbon border adjustment mechanism, a lot of discussions. It was the first and the last speaking point of every mission we had. Yeah. But I think the strongest argument there is, and you can interestingly see how the US and China is responding to it, and others as well, that any country that has committed to go through a transition has to reckon with the effects of carbon leakage. Anyone, until everyone
not just in Europe.
Not just in Europe, we were just the first. So with China, we have a very good relationship. DG Klima has sent their expert groups to set up an emission trade system, a carbon price, because we think that's the most successful way to deal with emissions. The Chinese always thank us. No. And they're now also thinking about a carbon border adjustment mechanism. The United States does not have a carbon price. No. At least you have, I think, 14 states that have it. California, some north and eastern, but no federal one, and they're not going to be anything anytime soon. But in Congress, there are 3 proposals for something like a foreign pollution fee or a carbon border adjustment. So the door is creaking, and this is something that we'll have to do, and others will have to do, and we will help countries as best we can to follow.
Okay, a couple of more questions from me really on where we go next, and you started doing so, but also for you here in the audience, start to think also of your questions and comments and observations and points you want to put to Tony in a minute. Look, where do we go next? We hear that the next COP is going to be in Azerbaijan. Is that now a requirement that COPs are held in oil and gas producing countries? Walk us a little bit through sort of how you see the next steps on the climate negotiations as such. Later on I want you to talk a bit more about climate and security and other points, but why don't you take that one first?
Well, thank you for that. So on Azerbaijan, well, I don't know to what extent you followed that, but you know in the UN system they have regional groups, and we have no say on if it's the turn of another regional group, and this time was the Eastern European group. We don't have a say how they're going to pick their new president, designate. Now that was stalemated for a long time.
Because of Armenia.
And Russia, and so there were a lot of issues there, and frankly speaking, we were at our wits' end what the solution would be. So it came to us as quite some surprise that suddenly, considering the relations that Armenia and Azerbaijan had, to put it mildly, suddenly Armenia came out and said we support it. So that solved it. Now, yes, it is another petrostate, and I think we saw with Dubai similarly. We always tell them, listen, the world's eyes are upon you. Science is our North Star. You'll have to deal with it. So let's see how that goes. We're still kind of digesting, so the implementation of COP28, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for others? So our climate diplomacy, I think, will be about consolidation, implementation, anchoring those commitments of COP28, which was, again, a good COP. Meanwhile, we have a couple of milestones like the G7 and the G20, the pre-COP. You have the Petersburg dialogue. You have the major economy forum, perhaps. You have the MOCA. You have all these important milestones where we will try to coalesce around what we have and try to convince and persuade others to continue. Because one thing is to set a target. The other one is to actually put it back into policies, and we see the same thing in the EU. We have our Fit for 5 framework.
How do you see it? Because the politics within the EU around the climate agenda, I mean, one has to acknowledge, we all read the declarations that are being made by different political parties, and there is more contestation, is there not, including in a country we both know well? How do you see? Because it affects our international credibility, no?
Well, first of all, what I wanted to say is that when it comes to the legislation, we put down the framework through Fit for 55, and I think our heavy-duty vehicles, I look at Jori Keisper because she knows all of this. We did it today, right? And so Fit for 55 has been adopted. Our legislative framework, which is the most comprehensive in the world, no one has it, is set there. So that's number one. That was not easy, but even arguably more difficult is the implementation. And member states have not fully done this. We have given them recommendations. Today we had the European Scientific Board for Climate Change come out with recommendations. We fully embrace it. This is what we want. This is what the climate law says. So we're pushing member states to fulfill their commitments. Now, with regard to political discussion, well, obviously, I'm not an elected politician, so...
but you read the press.
I read the press a lot, but I'd like to say something about it. I will go back to science and to nature. I think not asking questions doesn't mean that they're not there. I think reality will hit us, and I think sometimes also it's important to see, because when you say something on the surface, if you ask people, don't you think there's a lot going on? And they say, yeah, it's too much.
Terrible. Yeah.
But I think the important message is, if you tell people that what you did yesterday, you can do today, and tomorrow will be the same, that's a lie. Because with or without a Green Deal, there's a huge paradigm shift, whether it's demographics, whether it's climate, whether it's environment, technology. There's a change on everything for everyone at the same time, almost like the movie. It's going so fast. And so what we're trying to do is to navigate that. If you have a proper climate action, you can create an economy that's circular, that's clean, that's inclusive, that's competitive. If you don't, surely for a decade or so, you can still have profits by eking out the last drop of oil or the last bubble or molecule of gas, but at some point it will sputter and it's over. And what then? So I think economically it's the best way to go. On health, the fact that 300,000 people a year prematurely die, and I'm not talking, I spoke to UNICEF this morning, I'm not even talking about babies who have problems, young toddlers with respiratory system asthma because of air pollution. There's something we can do about it. It's not normal. So there's a price there as well. So for me, the costs of non-action always have to be put towards the investments which will deliver returns. Now, in the transition phase, there will be people that were impacted. When Kodak had to close down because we had digital photography, there were a lot of people out of a job. That's a problem. Economies change. We have to help those people from one job to another. That's a huge social task. This cannot be for, as my former boss said, the tofu eating, soy latte drinking, Tesla driving elite, because then it won't work. It has to be good for people. And I think there's a positive story is, because we have the cost of non-action will be terrifying, and the price of solutions will drive up if you don't do anything. But the positive side is, and I want to stop on that, but it's important, the positive side is we could do something for our health. We can green our cities. We can cool our cities 6 degrees if we have a proper urban plan with trees, better than air conditionings. We can have less pesticides in our food, which don't poison our children. We can do so many things that are actually better. And we can insulate homes. We can help people who don't have the money to put solar panels, reduce their energy costs. The thing is, we have to organize ourselves and get there. We got the technology, we have the skills, there is even money. It's about courage to go there.
Courage and politics. Okay, final question from me. You now, you joined the EAS after coming from the Commission and the team of Commissioner Timmermans. In the EAS, people think a lot about global diplomacy. They think about security, about threats and wars that are erupting all around us or are going on. One part of this very big agenda is the sort of the climate and security agenda, which we're talking to a colleague just before the start of this event. I mean, for a number of years, many bright people have written about this. Climate is a threat multiplier, the big sort of winners and losers of the transition, new conflicts, new types of conflicts. I mean, the High Representative and the Commission came out with a strategy last year. I know this agenda is close to your heart, personal, and I wouldn't want to end without giving you a sense of what is the number one or two things that you personally would like us to achieve under that big rubric of climate and security.
Okay, well, let's keep it simple. I think the most important thing is that not so much a new policy and new bags of money, but a new prism, because it is a reality. And I think in all the policies that we do, whether it's development cooperation, whether it's humanitarian action, whether it's on migration or conflict prevention, our missions, I think we need to count in or to factor in the risks of environmental degradation and climate security. I think that can help us with prevention. I can think that can help us with resolution, and I think it can help us with making peace even. That doesn't mean it's only about that, but it has to be a factor that is factored in. If we can do that in a whole of government approach, together with our allies and together with our member states and all our services, I think that would be great. We have a roadmap. Yeah. We're following up on it step by step, and I think that's a huge thing, because the issues that will be driven by climate are undeniable. If you superimpose a map of where the climate hits the hardest in Africa, for instance, and you superimpose it with the conflicts, it's uncanny. And the tragedy is that a lot of NGOs leave those places because it's uninhabitable or it's too dangerous, or sometimes governments leave it, and who goes in? Mercenaries who think, we can come there, we'll support the leader, we'll pull out the lithium, we'll put out the cobalt. This is not good. So we really need to do something about it.
Super. Well, thanks a lot, Tony, for that. I think it was tremendously helpful to hear from you what happened at COP, what it all means, the dynamics, some of the future steps that we need to take. Now it's a chance for all of you come in. The light is very strong facing us, but I have 1, 2, and 3 questions. Please, I think there's a roving mic, so I ask my colleague Moa to pass it around. We'll take 3, and then we'll give Tony a chance to respond. Please, if you could also briefly introduce yourselves.
Kalina Roschakov, Neue Zürcher Zeitung. You've already started talking about the relevance of the US and China, and especially Kerry and Xie. So I wanted to just follow up on that and see specifically, why do you think this tag duo was so relevant and significant over the past years in promoting climate diplomacy and also in kind of like advancing negotiations, and more importantly, what should follow? We already know who's supposed to replace Xia for China. Obviously, in the US circumstances, it's a bit more unclear who will follow, also after potentially Biden losing the election. So I would like to hear from you how you see, first of all, why the relevance of the two and what's supposed to come after them.
Very good. Let's hold your fire for a second. We'll group them together. Thank you.
Frédéric Simon from Euractiv. I'd be interested to hear how the negotiation went in Dubai about Article 6.
Article 6.
Article 6 about international carbon markets, because the EU was criticized for holding up an agreement about this. I'd just like to understand how the whole discussion went.
Super. Very clear. And I think there's one more, at least in this round, and then we'll give Tony a chance to reply, and we'll see how many more rounds we can do. Please.
Hi, Richard Cole from BBC. Please. I mean, there seems to be more voices coming out of people involved in the climate diplomacy process saying that the COP system itself isn't working anymore, it's too slow, it can't cope with the complexity of these issues. I'm thinking of sort of Simon Sharp's book, 5 Times Faster. I'm just interested in, do you agree with that? If you had a blank sheet of paper and you could redesign this multilateral negotiation process, what would you do?
Yeah. Okay, listen, I think it's a good, nice mix of questions. Easy ones, US questions. So, no, but it's good. We're here to address the real issues, Tony.
Yeah. So, thank you very much. Well, first, Kalina, so on the three amigos, diplomacy is a statecraft. You need humans for it. And so the human part of it is very important. But at the same time, these humans are professionals that are driven by the interests that they represent, the instructions that they get. So while I think whomever is in those places will find that they are driven to talk to one another. The EU, the US, and China have a very important part to play. Also India, also Brazil, and others, so we'll also speak to them. So I think there's a natural way, and whoever sits in that chair, for instance, look at Wopke Hoekstra. Wopke Hoekstra came in, he did his hearing, did really well, showed his ambition. I said, literally went around the world in 50 days, saw almost everyone, came in, and it was his first COP. I mean, mind you, this COP is tremendously complex. He stepped up to the plate and he hit a home run. And so whoever sits in those places, I have high confidence that because of their interest and because of their instructions, they know who to find. But if there's something extra, that's always helpful. And I think there was something extra with Kerry, Xi Jinping, and Timmermans. That just helped. But I think the time was conducive for it. With the Biden administration making climate a national priority, it was very clear where they came from. Now, they had issues on financing and of course, Congress. And this is, that I think is where the difference is between the EU and the US, because, we could do that. Xi Jinping, I think, he was asked to come back, which means he had a strong mandate from his leaders, and he's a very consummate diplomat who never, in all the conversations where I was present, never lost one sight of what the Chinese interest was, and which is good. That's what we do, and we did the same, and that worked. So I will see the new Chinese. I think his name is Liu Jianmin, a professional. We met him. He knows what it's about, and let's see who the Americans bring. But as I said, the personalities matter, but at the same time, the professionalism is what I expect, especially from these countries. Frédéric, on Article 6, that was, if you would have asked me, what was the thing that you regret that we didn't get? I would say Article 6. I remember we came into Madrid. Remember that was the COP28, which should have been taking place in Chile, if I'm correct, Chile. But then there were some demonstrations. Quickly went to Madrid, and we failed there. We couldn't get an agreement. And Article 6, it's like
for the uninitiated.
Yeah,
what does it
I know.
say?
I was about. I wanted to say that it's a heaven for technicians and it's a hell for anyone else. But Article 6 is basically the backbone of the carbon markets, how the carbon markets can function. And we believe that the only way carbon markets can function is if you can ensure a transparency and a high integrity, so that you're absolutely sure what you're actually trading. Because ultimately, we're about reducing emissions. And if you don't have that high integrity, then obviously it puts the whole thing at risk. So we're not there yet, but we're not giving up, and I'm sure we'll get there at some point. But this is the one thing that I wish we would have advanced more on. Then Richard, if I would have a blank piece of paper, well, I think the reality is I don't have a blank piece of paper, and I don't think anyone in the world has that blank piece of paper. And as I said in the beginning, I would take issue with anyone who says Paris is not working or the COP is not working. Diplomacy is a messy sport. Often you have the choice between bad, worse, or tragic. The fact that with so many people coming together in such a fraught world situation, because what I didn't say, we had concerns going into COP28. We had concerns that the world was on fire and how could we come there? So I would like to say, you know, if your ideal is we always get 100% what we want, that's unreal. But with diplomacy, it's often how do we come together and live to fight another day? And not only did we do that, I'm absolutely confident, and I'm glad and proud to say that the world actually moved the needle. We're going to move away from transition away from fossil fuel, and that's a good thing.
No, I agree. I think there's plenty of reasons to be critical, and it's right and proper that people outside hold people to account. But there are perhaps three things that are really quite important to hold on to that COP architecture does contain. One is the sort of link to science. Now, is science as the basis for defining the problem? As you know very well, in diplomacy, if you have a common definition of the problem, you're already halfway there, right? Secondly, it's by its very design, it's not only governments talking to other governments. It's in the whole process, and you alluded to that, you know, you have NGOs, you have companies, you have so many people who have a bearing on the outcome and who are needed to make the transition a reality. They're part, an integral part of the whole negotiating wider architecture. I think that's important. And third, I think it is important, but to take home that, you know, at the moment of war in Europe between Russia and with very, very serious crisis around the world, with growing tensions with a number of countries, that it's still possible to come together and negotiate tough, but to negotiate real outcomes on common problems. So I think these three things are worth protecting. Doesn't take away from any of the other points. Let's have a couple of more interventions. Who would like to come in? Come on, don't be shy. Yes, 1, 2, in front. No, please.
Thank you for the word. I'm not a journalist, so it's going to be.
Welcome.
You're welcome to first one. Yes.
I work at the Slovenian Perm Rep on energy policy. So thank you very much for all the information and the thoughts you've shared. First of all, thank you for mentioning science at the beginning of your intervention. I think that's very important, and I will actually connect my question to that. We are entering a year of several quite important elections happening globally. The US election obviously is the one that's looming above the climate policy as well, but we also have elections in Belgium, in the UK, and so on. Are you in any way ring fencing already or preparing the strategy, the negotiating strategy for alternative outcomes of these elections? I can share some experience from my country. We've already seen turbocharging and weaponization of climate and energy policies in local and national political contexts. So I guess the narrative will have to be aligned across the board. So I'm just interested to hear if you have any thoughts on how to get ready for this upcoming debate, which is probably going to be hard, and I promise I will bring that back home with me. Thank you.
Super question. Thank you very much. I think we go to my left. I think there was a question there. Yes, on the side, please.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Clara Stijk, also from a Perm Rep. My question.
Which Perm Rep, sorry?
The Romanian Perm Rep.
Romanian, welcome.
My question relates a little bit to what you said earlier about the 2024 election year and the fatigue that we don't want to call fatigue, but it's starting to show up. I wanted to ask if you noticed something similar in on the global stage in 2024 already. Do you see any signs of backlash against our common ambitions? And if so, how will this affect COP29? How can we better prepare it for it? What's the how can we better try to overcome it? Because you know very well what we've just adopted is just 55%. Next one will be 90, probably. Yeah. So more efforts, more money, more sacrifices. So we have to look at this and to be prepared. Thank you very much. Sorry for the long question.
Thank you. I think it's a very good point. It builds on a little bit this sort of domestic politics and how does it go from here. Is there a third question? Yes, please. Yeah, Judith, please.
It feels a little bit like cheating because I was with Tony at COP28. But when there is no question asked, I feel compelled to ask one. I'm Jori Keijster with the European Commission. There was a lot of focus, of course, on the language around fossil fuels. But what for you was the next big story coming out of this COP?
Good. Look, another set of three, Tony. Take those. So we have elections, how to prepare, fatigue, what lies next.
Okay. So first, hvala lepa. En me veseli.
He's showing off. He was stationed in Ljubljana.
Yeah. I have my love affair with Slovenia. No,
Very
listen.
good.
No, I think it's a very good question, but also one very difficult to answer because anyone who knows what the outcome of elections is lying. And you have all these pundits of doom. Let's see. This is democracy. Voters will have their chance. They'll go to the ballot and cast their vote. Whatever. I think the only thing we can control is, and that's what you alluded to, is what we can do. And what I think the best thing we can do is to stay the course. We have our Fit for 55. We have our roadmap, and the best thing to do is to go forward. And why is that important? Because if you do it, you show predictability. And when you show predictability, it means that investors and business people and tradespeople know where the regulatory future is. And they will start putting their money, because there is money. They'll put it in. And once they put it in, and once the market has locked in this transition, and you can see already the beginnings of it, there's no stopping it. Because they will go where you can earn the money. And I'm confident that where you can earn the money for the long term is in this transition. Not in an old business model, maybe for a few years, but at some point, as I said, that will be sputtering. Then coming to the second question from the Romanian permit, you didn't mention your name, so I cannot. Clar. Thank you for that. Well, first of all, your question was how globally do you see a backlash? Well, you know, barely a month ago, we had COP28. I think that's the best gauge, the best bellwether of where globally we stood. And as I said, the outcome was pretty darn good. So I think because of the reality, countries came there and understood we have to coalesce around these things. However, as we move forward, you said, you know, it's just 55. Well, 55% in 2030 is still quite important. But I'd also like to say, and you alluded to an upcoming communication, a proposal that this commission will make, but the next mandate will have to take up, and that's the goal for 2040. I'm not going to give you any details, also simply because I haven't seen the text, so I can plausibly deny what's in there. But it is interesting that if you have 2030 up here, I'm not an econometrist, so I think, but you have 2030 up here, you have 2050 down there at the y, at the x-axis, sorry, and it's 0. You go for 20, you draw a line, there's not a lot of different landing zones, you know, where you probably can end up. And if we continue to implement the Fit for 55, I dare say, I look also at Jori, I think around 88% we probably would have already covered. So if we stay the course, which is my most important message, I think we'll get there. Not worried about it. Then Jori, thank you. I think, and I should have mentioned this, and perhaps that's why Jori is helping me. We had, when I said, remember that I said Sharm was a 6 because it was very acrimonious. And I think the EU helped broker a deal on loss and damage. There was a huge call from the G77 for a loss and damage fund. And what we said was, and if you look at the speech of Frans Timmermans at the end of that, he said there's a yawning gap between what science tells us and what we did here today. Yes, we want to help you with loss and damage. Yes, we want to put money in that fund. But if you don't act on mitigation, there is no money enough in the world to redress that loss and damage. So that's how we left COP. And then for a whole year in the so-called transitional committees, we were supposed to have 4, we had 5. There was a very difficult negotiation to actually set up such a fund. How would the fund, where would the fund go? Who would get this money? And so right before the COP, finally the 5th Transitional Committee came up with an agreement that, yes, we'll have the fund. It will be mostly focused, if possible, on the most vulnerable countries, which is very important. It will be put temporarily under the World Bank, so that's an easy infrastructure. And the first thing that was done, and I think Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber deserves credit for it, was to, before the COP really started, to come out and say, we agree on the recommendation of the Transitional Committee, we will have this fund, and not only that, we're going to put in money for it. And the EU put about 430 million euros in it, or dollars, I never know, but I think euros. We calculate euros. The UAE, which is formally a developing country, of course, not true. But this is important, I'll tell you why. Put in 100 million. So we had over €500 million to set up this fund. Now that's not enough to salvage all the loss and damage, but that was a huge thing. So I was very happy. I think all of us were very happy. That was an important thing we achieved.
Right at the start.
And yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot. I want to give people here one more chance. I think we could squeeze in 1 or 2. I'll give priority to people who haven't spoken yet. I also saw, I don't want to put her on the spot, Belen, if she wants to come in.
My boss.
No, my boss. No. All right, we follow all protocol. Please, ma'am, please.
Again, Kalina Roshakov. I just wanted to follow up on some of the comments you made on the upcoming European elections and the 2040 target. And just wondering, do you think that going ahead with regulating a 2040 emissions reduction target is actually good policy given the current political environment and backlash to supposed or perceived green overreach? I'm also asking because the political capital that you will need to invest in getting governments around to agreeing another target might perhaps be better invested in either mobilizing the necessary funds or other policies that support implementation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. It's a sharp question. Please, one more, and then we'll wrap it up. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, the finance gap is what I'm interested in as well. But maybe more generally, maybe you could explain how the creation of your own role came about, because I mean,
why am I there?
I mean, maybe it's because it's been so hectic with the Green Deal. I mean, you haven't been extremely visible, it seems to me. Just explain, you know, how your role was created.
Yeah.
What is your work
before,
program, and
that's a lovely last
what's
question.
coming next?
I know. I'll try to answer that. But let's first with the question on 2040. Well, first of all, as far as I know, it's not a legal proposal. But second of all, and I want to repeat it because it's important. If you look at the climate law, which is our political sat-nav on what we are going to do. And at the time, it was also said, this is also to ensure that the urgent doesn't always push out the important. So we set ourselves, this is the legacy of the von der Leyen Commission, we set ourselves for climate neutrality in 2050. We set ourselves, and all the government leaders came behind this, and the European Parliament, Fit for 55, at least Fit for 55, I think we'll overdo it. If we do it well, we're probably at 57.6, I cannot say that, but we're doing even better if it's implemented. Again, draw a line from 2030 to 2040. I mean, I cannot say I'm going to join the Olympic swimming team in 2050, but I'm going to continue to eat donuts until 2049. It doesn't work that way. So if you draw that line, you know, the margin, the bandwidth of where you land is not going to be a complete surprise, I think. So it's what the climate law says to us. I think it's also a good policy, but I'm not going to, I'm a civil servant. I'm not going to delve into what the politics and democracy, that's what they do. This communication, because it's a communication, will come out with whatever it says, and then it's up to the political and democratic process to deal with it. But we have a climate law, so it's a natural concomitant. And finally, if we fully implement the Fit for 55, the framework that we have, we will have covered very close to 85, 88% already. I don't want to put a precise number on it, but just to say that it's not like something completely new out of the blue. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Finally.
You want to say something?
So on my job, and I haven't been visible. Well, first of all, I don't.
I didn't mean to be.
No, but maybe that's a compliment for a diplomat. I mean, no, but there was. I had a predecessor, Mark van Heukelen, who did a great job. If you talk about the global methane pledge, that was him. If you talk about just energy transition partnerships, Mark van Heukelen did a heck of a job there. And at some point, he moved on. Then we had somebody who did two jobs, Tibor Stelbatsky, who is now the energy envoy. He did a good job. And then in the summer, or I should say after summer, on the 1st of October, I started. And so that job was there and has been consolidated, and I was very honored to be offered it. And I see myself, the mission I got is we have different institutions. We have DG Klima, which is like, that's where the multilateral climate negotiations happen, but the ES has a lot of bilateral things as well. And while they were working well together, the idea is, how can we do it even better? So you bring me from the Commission, we will work at co-location, we share information, so that's bringing those together. And I see myself also as a support and an extension for what's happening. So this is, and also in Dubai, I was there in the team, fully integrated. And when the commissioner couldn't go, I would go, or somebody else would go. So we work as Team EU.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Tony, for that. I mean, I, for one, am very, very pleased that you play that role. I think you're supremely well equipped with a set of experiences, allowing you to really bring that Team EU approach to the job. Thank you for doing this talk.
Thank you.
I think it was really, really nice. I mean, I learned a lot. It confirmed that you bring a sort of a level of energy and eloquence and a broader vision. There are not that many people who can combine politics with diplomacy, geopolitics, science, but Tony is one of them. So you are a real asset, I think, for the collective ship that is EU foreign policy. So thanks a lot for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. I know you had a choice.
Once they were in, they didn't.
No, exactly. Also, there's some snow outside, so no, all of you you came, and for people who've been following this online, thank you for that too. We as EU ISS will continue to work on this file. We have our colleague Lucas that you met earlier, who is leading it. So for any further questions and what suggestions on other kinds of topics in this broader agenda, please approach Lucas. And thank you all for coming. Thanks. Ja, vind ik het. Heel goed.
Ja.
Optimistisch. Kom maar naar midden.
Situation, you know, interviewing